The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to get started in a couple of minutes here. We're just going to let the last few people trickle in, and then we will get started. Thank you so much for joining us today. All right, I'm going to get started today. So thank you for coming to Volunteer Recruitment and Hiring. This is a really fun webinar. It's one that we created last year in 2020 for our volunteer screening series, and we're continuing it this year. It's got a lot of really great content, and I think it's incredibly timely for right now. So we're just going to get going. So what is the volunteer screening program? I guess I should also introduce myself. So my name is Victoria. I'm a programs coordinator at Volunteer Alberta. I work on the volunteer screening program, and I also work on a program called Youth at the Table. So what is the volunteer screening program? The volunteer screening program is a collection of different educational and funding opportunities to help organizations develop their screening capacity. When we say volunteer screening or just screening, very broadly, we're describing the process of defining the relationship between volunteers and their organizations. Screening is a topic that encompasses a lot of subtopics, such as the ones we're covering today. These topics collectively aim to improve the quality and the safety of the programs and services in our communities. So knowing what we're meaning by screening, Volunteer Alberta provides educational resources, tools that are designed to help nonprofit organizations improve their volunteer screening processes and procedures. We administer the Vulnerable Sector Check Fee Waiver for volunteers in many municipalities across Alberta. This may be one of the programs that you're most familiar with as an organization. We also provide microgrants, known as the Volunteer Screening Development Grants. These help organizations cover the costs associated with developing their unique volunteer screening processes and procedures. The application for these grants open typically early summer, so if this is something that's interesting to you, please keep your eye out on our website for those. And then, of course, the work that we do with this program wouldn't be possible without the generous funding from the Government of Alberta. We also like to thank Volunteer Canada. Volunteer Canada has provided support and expertise on screening across Canada. And with Public Safety Canada, they published the screening handbook. The handbook is invaluable to volunteer screening, and we take a lot of our content and kind of knowledge out of this handbook, and it's super relevant. We use it in combination with information that's relevant to Alberta. One of the last things I want to remind folks is that please understand that Volunteer Alberta does not provide legal advice. This webinar and our resources will provide some really useful and general information, but you should always bring any concerns specific to your organization and work to a legal professional. I also wanted to note what my coworker Graham is on the line here. Graham is the Senior Coordinator of Programs at Volunteer Alberta. So if you have any technical issues throughout the screening webinar, please feel free to reach out to Graham at gdearden@volunteeralberta.ab.ca. His information is also in the chat. So with this webinar, we're going to kind of just go through the meat and potatoes of the program, and then at the very end, we'll leave some time for questions. So if you do have any questions, you can pop them into the questions chat pane on the side of your webinar. We'll get to those at the very end. But of course, if you can't stick around for the entire webinar, no worries. Please feel free to send us an email at screening@volunteeralberta.ab.ca, and we can get to your questions there as well. All right, so. All right, let's get into a quick introduction. So this webinar focuses on recruitment and hiring volunteers to your organization. Your organization may be well equipped in knowing where to find your volunteers, but you may be wondering how to get them involved in the work that you do. Locating the right people for the right job is key. The interests and skills that your volunteers should be a good match for your organization's needs. Volunteer recruitment goes beyond putting out a generic post on the internet. Organizations should be able to articulate their goals and their mandate, the importance of the work that they do, and target positions to create meaningful opportunities for volunteers. By focusing on recruiting volunteers by focusing on recruiting and hiring skilled and suitable volunteers, organizations can use the resources more effectively by having strong, reliable, and resilient volunteer corps doing high-quality work. Organizations are always evolving, so having a strong and flexible volunteer recruitment strategy can ensure you're equipped to react with the changing needs and demands. I'm sure so many of you found this in 2020 with the COVID-19 pandemic. Things change so rapidly, and the need for your volunteer recruitment strategy to kind of evolve with those changing needs and goals is super important. This webinar will discuss the importance and benefits of a good volunteer recruitment strategy. We'll talk about the different aspects you can consider, and then we'll go into talking about hiring, which includes application forms, interviews, and things like that. We all know that volunteers can, and they typically are, vital to so many organizations. Before we dig deeper into recruitment and hiring strategies and things to think about, it's important to begin discussing why a good recruitment strategy is important to your volunteer program and your volunteer screening processes. In thinking about your volunteer recruitment strategy, the first thing to consider is your organization. What are the goals you are trying to achieve? How do those goals align with your mandate? And more specifically, having a strong volunteer recruitment strategy and volunteer corps can directly feed into your organization's strategic and operational planning. One of the first things an organization should consider when developing a recruitment strategy is what is outlined in your operational plan. What gaps exist in the work that you plan to do? Are there any goals in your operational plan you're worried you don't have the capacity to meet? Your recruitment strategy can be fundamentally impacted by these types of concerns, as they will indicate where you might need to find support. And the support can, of course, come from volunteers. Also, consider what kinds of volunteers you'll need. By keeping your operational plan in mind, you can consistently ask yourself how you can achieve what you've set out to do and how your volunteers can make that happen. And with a well thought out operational plan shaped by your organization's mission, vision, and values, your volunteers will naturally align with the strategic directions of the organization and support your strategic plan. Whether you have a robust program with hundreds of volunteers, or maybe even a smaller operation in the tens, your goals and your mandate should drive the work being done by your volunteers. With the previous point in mind, while the core values, mission, and culture differ depending on your organization, the outcome that matters the most to volunteers is making an impact and feeling valued. Your volunteer recruitment strategy must consider how your organization and volunteers will work together to achieve goals. From the outset, ensure you reiterate how your volunteers will fit into the work that they will be doing for your organization. In your broader volunteer management plan, you should have a system in place to foster a culture that celebrates and values the work that your volunteers do. For example, having a dedicated volunteer manager that checks in, asks for feedback, works alongside their volunteers. All of these aspects can create a really supportive environment. Hosting volunteer appreciation events or sending out thank you notes reinforces that the work your volunteers are doing is important and it doesn't go unnoticed. This work can feed into your recruitment strategy because it is a selling point for potential volunteers. It's the first step in making volunteers feel valued, and it can start before they even volunteer with you. Following those first 2 points, organizations can start demonstrating and articulating their goals and values of their volunteers. Through this, organizations can boost their organization's presence and impact future engagement in the community. Volunteers who are highly engaged show up eager to work and make a difference. They become the champions of your organization, its mission, its programs, and its services. They may even be brand ambassadors who can recruit other prospective volunteers through their network or even the funders. Volunteers that are excited about the work that they do, they talk to friends, their family, and their coworkers about their experiences. They may even share social media posts from your organization calling for new volunteers. This not only helps attract new volunteers, but it can broadcast the work that the organization is doing to the public, which is super important. This should be a part of a recruitment strategy. It should be a way for organizations to plan how they will market their volunteer program to potential volunteers, and how its program will naturally market itself through the community, through community interaction and impact. One of the most important aspects of recruiting your volunteers is making sure you're recruiting the right people for the right job. A general call out can certainly be beneficial for things such as large festivals. However, when it comes to the day-to-day work of organizations, recruiting skilled volunteers will benefit both your organization and the volunteer themselves. The experience and skills your volunteer possesses should match the position that they're filling. Maybe you need a social media whiz, or even a graphic designer. The position could work with children a lot. So you may be looking for somebody with extensive childcare background or a teaching background. Whatever the case may be, your recruitment effort should be laser focused on who you are looking for. This is also key for screening. By putting the right people in the right job, you're creating a safer environment for the organization, the volunteer, and the community. Now that we have a really clear idea why a recruitment strategy is an important step in your screening process, we can talk a little bit about the different things to consider when building or updating your recruitment strategy. The first thing to consider is who will recruit your volunteers. Many organizations have a volunteer manager or an organizer, whether they're paid staff or they could even be a volunteer themselves. If your organization doesn't have a specific person or a team, you may want to consider putting together a team that can see through your volunteer recruitment process. You may not have a volunteer manager or volunteer management team, but if your organization is engaging volunteers, somebody is making that happen. Figure out who directly or indirectly supports that work and formally outline that role and ensure that you have commitment from everybody involved. For example, a small organization may have a number of board members and the executive director regularly calling on volunteers to come work with the organization, but there may be no formal volunteer manager or volunteer management process. They might also have other volunteers that reliably spread the word about their work. A recruitment strategy should outline this work, regardless of the title, plan for ways to streamline or improve the work, and inform everybody what they're responsible for when it comes to volunteer recruitment. Considering what you need volunteers for is crucial to your volunteer recruitment strategy. As we've previously mentioned, it goes beyond putting out a general call out for volunteers. Without considering your volunteer needs, You'll likely get help, but you might not get the help that you need. Consider what you need a volunteer for. Do you need volunteers to walk dogs or fill food hampers? Or maybe it's an operational task like digitizing your volunteer records or running your social media. It may help to think about the work that needs to get done in your organization, and then think about the specific programs, services, and operations that would require a few extra helping hands. Don't forget to talk to others in your organization, as they might see the need for a new position or even help in the work they're already doing. From here, you'll be able to outline what kind of skills or interests your volunteer should have for your position. Once you establish your need, you'll want to think about how many volunteers you need. Considering each volunteer position and the tasks and duties associated with them can help establish how many volunteers you need. You should also consider time commitment that a volunteer may have to put in. If your program, event, or special project is going to be quite cumbersome, you might want to consider recruiting a team of talented volunteers to divide the tasks and time to prevent burnout. For example, if you recruit one volunteer to do all of your marketing for an upcoming summer festival, that's a lot of work. Instead, you might want to consider bringing in someone to do the job of content writing, someone to manage the social media, someone to do your design work, someone to deliver and print posters or materials to spread the word. These skilled volunteers will shine in the positions they're in. They'll be able to learn from one another, and the likelihood of retaining your volunteers will be higher. All right, so now that we've kind of considered some of the preliminary pieces to recruiting, you're probably ready to start working on the process. There are three main ways to disseminate that you are looking for volunteers. This includes mass appeals, targeted recruitment, and networking. So for mass appeals, those are generally the posts you see that include volunteers wanted. Mass appeals cover a lot of ground, and you'll likely get help. This method is definitely helpful for positions that don't require necessarily a super targeted skill set. For example, you may post on social media like Facebook or Twitter that you're looking for volunteers for your annual jamboree in the park. There may be no specific roles, or there may be broad roles such as a hand washing station attendant or somebody to give away freebies. But keep in mind that roles that you advertise this way should be easily done by people of many ages and abilities. Through these roles, you never really know who may pick up and be excited to work with your organization. So the roles that you're advertising through these roles, through mass appeal, should be able to kind of be tailored to anybody that's interested. Mass appeal can also look like posters and flyers. Think about when you used to see posters in your local Starbucks or the Second Cup down the street, things like that. Lots of organizations, especially organizations in tightly knit communities, have bulletin boards or community communication channels that you could take advantage of when you're looking to do mass appeal or recruitment. Your community association or your or even if you are working with an FCSS, you might have these boards in local offices, in community centers, things like that, where folks are always looking for different opportunities. These are a really great place to advertise volunteer positions with mass appeal. So next, there's targeted recruitment, which combines really great position descriptions with your recruitment strategy. Being able to target the specific skill set of a volunteer to ensure their interests and skills match the positions your organization is looking to fill is key. For example, your organization may be looking for a volunteer to take over your social media. This is really common as social media has been increasingly important to organization visibility and marketing. Your position description should lay out everything your volunteer should be responsible for, including any specialized skills, education, or things like that. Specialized skills could be experience using a post-scheduling software like Buffer or Hootsuite. Advanced writing skills. Maybe you're looking for somebody that has post-secondary level writing. maybe if it's experience in marketing, graphic design, whether that's maybe a diploma or a degree or some type of certificate. From there, you'll want to make connections with people that have these skills. If you're in a municipality that has a college or university or a technical institute, a student club, for example, is a really great place to start. You can find student clubs at post-secondary institutions by connecting with the Students Association on campus. Once you make that connection, you can share your position with them and let them know how students can apply. This is not only a great opportunity for your organization to get a skilled volunteer, but it's a degree-relevant learning opportunity for students to build their resume or even portfolio. You could start by reaching out to other nonprofits in the sector that may have similar connections to potential volunteers with similar skill sets to the ones you're looking for. If you're helping out with finding volunteers for your child's sports team, it may help for you to talk to other sports teams in the area and see if they know anybody that has the time to help with tasks that overlap with your organizations. To learn a little bit more about the possibility of sharing volunteers, we will link you to a tip sheet in a follow-up email. This tip sheet will talk about what it looks like to share volunteers, especially for organizations that have similar missions, visions, and mandates. Sharing volunteers might be something that's super interesting and beneficial to your organization. So we will definitely share that with you. You can also facilitate targeted recruitment through your local volunteer center. These organizations are structured to help volunteers find positions that are relevant to them, and organizations find volunteers that are the right fit for them. To find your local volunteer center, check out Volunteer Alberta's website. All right, so the final thing here is networking. If you're already working with a group of really awesome volunteers, which I'm sure most of you are, they probably know others. Reaching out to people you know or already work with is a great way to find new volunteers that are passionate about the work you do. For example, maybe you have a group of volunteers that come help out every Thursday evening to pack food hampers. You realize you could really use some extra hands during the weeknights. So you could reach out to those volunteers to see if they have connections with others that may have weeknight availability and would like to help out. Another great way to network is through hosting an open house or even a mixer. These are not only great ways to introduce the community to your organization, but it's also a way to highlight to the community the different volunteer opportunities you have and to potentially recruit them. Don't forget to have some volunteers available. There's something really impactful about volunteers talking to prospective volunteers about their experience with an organization and the work being done. Your current volunteers are some of the biggest cheerleaders and champions your organization can have. Keep in mind that all of these are very general methods of outreach. Your strategy will be dependent on your organization, your need for volunteers, and the specific role and tasks that need to be filled, even within your existing volunteer base. A combination of methods may be the perfect tactic for your organization. With a great position and a great position description in tow, you can combine both mass appeal and targeted recruitment into your recruitment strategy to yield really great results. This is also a really great plug. We partner with Propellus quite frequently with the Volunteer Connector. Volunteer Connector is also a really great place to post your volunteer positions. This is a really great way to kind of combine that mass appeal and your targeted recruitment together. Volunteer Connector connects thousands of volunteers to organizations every single year. So I'd really recommend checking out Volunteer Connector if you haven't already. Okay, so let's start thinking about the process that you will take to recruit your volunteers. But the other part to this is having a good application form. Today, most applications are online and can be found through an organization's website. Some organizations also keep forms on hand in their office for walk-in prospective volunteers. I'm not too sure how many of your offices are open right now and are accepting walk-in guests. So if you haven't transitioned to having your volunteer application form online, we'd really recommend this. It's important to keep in mind that your application should be accessible to many different demographics and should strive for inclusivity. While online applications are generally easier to manage, this does put up a few barriers for individuals that maybe don't have access to the internet, whereas in-person applications can be difficult for those who can't make it to your office to complete. So it's a little bit of a balancing act, which is a little bit more difficult in a COVID-19 situation. But that's something definitely to consider if your office is open. Application forms certainly can be scaled for your organization. Some organizations need super complex application forms that match the complexity of the work being done by their volunteers. Some organizations, you might not only need some basic information on file to get started, such as the name and contact info. Think about what you need to know from a potential volunteer and what might deter your volunteer from applying. This slide includes an example of what an application form can look like. A spot for the applicant's information, including their name, their home address, phone number, and email. Keep privacy legislation in mind when you're asking for information. Ensure you're only asking for information that you will actually need, and ensure you have a process for keeping this information confidential. A series of checkboxes with available volunteer positions for the volunteer to choose from. You don't have to make an application form for every single position, but you should note the full screening procedure in the position description to make sure volunteers are aware of what your organization's screening process looks like for the positions they're interested in. An availability section is super important, especially when you're trying to fill volunteer positions around the clock. Some organizations will put time clocks such as 8 a.m. to 12 p.m., or look at the options of AM or PM or both. This is a good place to put the time commitment for volunteers as well. If you have a 4-hour-a-week time commitment, the volunteer should know that in advance. Having a designated spot for volunteers to either check off or input their own interests, skills, and competencies is key to skilled volunteerism and for screening. Starting off by providing checkboxes for skills and interests that are important to your organization. Or you could just leave the space blank and the volunteer can input their skills as they see fit. Or you might want to do both. A list of skills for them to check off might be a good way to show the volunteer what your organization needs, and a blank space could be useful if your application form is more general in nature, and you will start sorting people into a variety of positions afterwards. Some other information you may want to consider collecting is things such as past volunteer experience, information on why they want to volunteer with you, and maybe the contact information for some references that you could call for them. All right, so after your recruitment post or advertisement is out into the universe, or it's almost there, you want to start thinking about the next steps. Firstly, we'd like to reiterate that as part of screening, you should always screen your volunteers like you do a new employee. Your organization's screening policies should be followed with every new volunteer that comes into the organization. This helps mitigate risk and liability for both your organization and the volunteer. If you're unsure about liability, it's always beneficial to check in with your organization's insurance broker. With any application, someone needs to review it. For the organization, this could be your volunteer manager. It could also be your program lead. You may want to consider a rubric or other internal processes for evaluating your applications ahead of time. These processes could be the same ones used for staff, or you could create one specifically for volunteers or positions. These processes will help ensure that applications are reviewed consistently. Another benefit of a rubric is that it can be kept with the resume and/or a cover letter for easy referral in the future. Next, from your application review process, you should be able to establish a short list from the applications. When creating your short list, keep in mind the number of volunteers you decided you needed for each position. You should also consider that some of your applicants might not be a good fit once they are interviewed, so that should also impact your short list. For example, you need 5 volunteers for morning weekend shifts for cat care. You may want to consider shortlisting 7 or 8. Creating a shortlist will also help determine how much time needs to be dedicated to the interview process. Okay, so we can start talking about the interview. You may want to schedule an interview with a prospective volunteer. Like we've said, we always recommend bringing volunteers into your organization like you would with staff. This includes an interview and any other necessary steps to screening. An interview doesn't have to be in person. It can be through other means such as a video chat or even a phone call. Planning what your interview will look like is really important. It's from ensuring your interviewer has all the necessary paperwork, such as a resume, application, cover letter, references, having a list of questions, and even knowing the interview schedule. Be prepared. The moment your interviewee comes in to the interview should not be the first time you're looking at their application or any of the materials you'll be using for the interview. For example, you should review the volunteer position as it was posted, highlight any qualifications for the application that match the position, and ensure you know what questions you're going to ask, all in advance. Be consistent. This is really important. Your interview should ask ask most, if not all, the same questions. If you have follow-up questions, that's okay. Just keep in mind to ensure your interview process is fair. You should be conducting your interviews the same way for every interviewee. One of our final interview tips is to be open and honest with your prospective volunteer. You should always be forthcoming with your volunteer if there's an extra piece to screening, such as a police information check or a vulnerable sector check, or even if time commitments are strict. We will be providing you in an additional email a document that we previously had created for the Serving Communities Internship Program. There's some more interview tips there that may be useful to you. These are more targeted for working with youth. So if those are the types of volunteers you're looking at interviewing and working with, we would definitely recommend you take a look at that. All right, so once your interview process is complete and all of the extra screening protocols have been completed, you'll want to review your interviews by looking back at your notes and discussing the interviews with anybody else that was present. Talk about the strengths and weaknesses, if that volunteer would be a good fit, if the applicant clears the screening protocols you have in place. You should also make sure to call references when needed. From there, you should make your decisions and begin notifying the applicant. In the example we previously used, if you have 5 available positions, you should create a list of your top 5 and call them first. If anything arises, such as the individual is no longer available or interested, you can reevaluate using protocols and procedures your organization has in place. When you notify successful applicants of their status, ensure you provide them with any pertinent information for the next steps. For example, this could include information on how to register for orientation, links to any training they must complete, or etc. Something to consider is letting those know who weren't successful through the interview stage know their status. While they may not have been successful this time, they may be a good fit for future positions. You should have internal procedures for keeping applications on file or not. If you do, ensure you ask the volunteer if they're all right with you keeping their info on file for the future, and so you can consider them later. All right, so these are sort of some of the steps that we've talked about, from who is recruiting your volunteers to interviews to reviewing applications and all that kind of fun stuff. While these are all super important, one of the things your organization should keep in mind is scalability. Not every organization has the same amount of capacity other organizations do, and that's totally okay. You should make these steps scalable to your organization, whether that's how many volunteers you need to interview, how many volunteers are being screened, where you put all of your recruitment documents, who's part of the recruitment process. Whatever you need to do is definitely scalable. We're happy to chat further about scalability if you have any questions about, I have no staff working on this, I have a volunteer, or anything like that. We're really happy to chat through some of those processes with you, because it can be a little bit complicated, but the one main thing is ensuring that your mission, vision, and goals as an organization are met are super important. All right, and that is it for the content. So we will switch over to the question and answers portion. So in your webinar tab here, there is a questions pane. It doesn't look like there's any now, but if you have any questions, please let us know. You can also raise your hand if you'd like to ask me a question out loud, or if you'd like to ask Graham a question out loud. We're here to help. So I'll just give it a couple of minutes here, see if anybody has any questions. All right, I'm not seeing anything here. All right, well with that, what I'll do here is we can send out a follow-up email. You'll get that within probably about 24 hours here. We'll send you some follow-up information. You'll get a PDF including with this presentation and all of the speakers' notes, just in case you'd like to go back and review it. If you have any questions further on, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. You can get in touch with me at screening@volunteeralberta.ab.ca or anything like that. We also have a ton of resources on our website if you're interested. But with that, I will let everybody go and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much, everybody.